This is a Renegade Media Network podcast. You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Counterflow Podcast. Great to have you with me. I'm probably more excited to get this one out than I have been for an episode in quite some time. But first, I need to recap, or at least kind of discuss briefly, my trip to Sayulita, Mexico. It was December 10th through 12th. It was put on by Johnny Profita from the Peddling Fiction podcast. The event was called the Sayulita Super Spreader. Friends, I'm here to tell you that was probably the best Liberty event I've ever been a part of, I should say, for sure. You say, well, hey, you had a thing at your own house with Renegade University, Texas. Yes, and I loved that. I will tell you this, having something at your own place, there's a bit of an underlying stress that you don't have when they just fly you to Mexico and kind of put you up in this beautiful condo. I know that's shocking, but there's not that underlying stress. Unless you're Robbie the Fire. Robbie, I love this guy. He's a trip. He was not particularly big on the food down there. He was worried that he was going to get sick. None of us got sick, though. We had a great time. The trip, I guess it was a taxi. It was some kind of car that took us from Puerto Vallarta to Sayulita. It was about an hour. It was Robbie the Fire, myself, Anthony Samaroff, and Clint from Liberty Lockdown in this little car. It was hilarious. We could tell some stories from that little car ride. One of them being that once we were in Sayulita, the streets are quite small there and kind of cobblestone-ish. Well, one of the streets wasn't paved at all, and the map app was telling us to turn up it. And I say up it because it was about 45 degrees diagonal up. And the cab driver started driving up it, and about halfway, the dirt was too loose, and the tires started spinning, and we started rolling backwards. Yeah, and the whole time this weird 80s music was playing, and it felt like we were in some type of 80s movie montage. Anyway, there were so many good times down there. Like I said, just the other podcaster guys were really cool to hang with. I love Robbie the Fire. We've now been able to do a few of these events together. Mark, Claire, of course, your friend, my friend, and his awesome wife, Diane. She was awesome. Anthony Samaroff, I love this guy. Very clever, very dry humor, very subtle, but he's good. Clint from Liberty Lockdown was cool. All the friends that were there, Autumn, Asia, C.D. McCrae, Ray, Scott, who I met talking to us about mining crypto, which I learned a lot from him there. And if you get into that, I'll tell you this, you can make some money, but it definitely cost some money to get into it. That was interesting stuff. The dinners we had together, this one Fed that somehow mysteriously showed up to eat with us, really interesting story as well. But anyway, my point is, what a trip. And Johnny, he really did a great job putting this on. He wants to do it every year. So I would suggest, if he does do it, to attend it. And yes, side note, drinking Ricea with Megan Murphy down in Sayulita is quite the experience as well. She could put that stuff away. You saw her probably on Joe Rogan. He didn't like it when they were drinking it. She loves it. I actually really enjoyed it too. A lot of fun down there in Sayulita, Mexico, and in Puerto Vallarta. Both towns were great, and the event was awesome. So on to this show. I told you up top that I'm more excited to put this one out than I have been for an episode in quite some time. It's on Orthodox Christianity. There's been an uptick of interest in this over the last year or two. And I mean, that includes me, your host and humble narrator. I have been very heavily interested in it in the last few months. And I guess really I should thank Vin Armani, aka Cyprian, for initially kind of piquing my curiosity about it. I'll say this, I've got several friends now, and this includes me, that have started looking into it and have really gone down the old rabbit hole, as they say, with research and whatnot. And we are really loving what they discovered. Of my friends that I speak to on a regular basis that have started delving into Orthodox Christianity, not one of them have said, ooh, I just don't like it. And maybe that's because in our nature, a lot of us appreciate like a purity, a very hardcore, pure, real version of things. That's a lot of us feel that way about Murray Rothbard. Once you're into libertarianism, you like the Rothbardian version of it because it's the pure version of libertarianism. Well, there's an aspect of Orthodox Christianity that's, for me at least, feels like the pure version of Christianity. There's this hardcore, like I said, nature to it that I really, really like. They've remained unchanged and unaffected by modernity, and I really like that a lot. We get into that. And so this leads me to our guest today. The reason I know this man, and the reason one of the reasons I should say, not the reason, a reason why I've really enjoyed going to St. Andrew Orthodox Christian Church here in my little town of Lockhart. Who knew? One of the reasons I've enjoyed it so much is because of the priest at that church, Father Ignatius, and he is my guest today. We're going to get into a litany of issues regarding Christianity, religion, and check this out. They did not close their doors ever during the lockdowns. Why would they do that? They look to a higher authority than Greg Abbott, and I think you would probably assume who that authority is. And so let's get into this. I've got the priest from the St. Andrew Orthodox Christian Church right here in Lockhart on the episode today. Father Ignatius, welcome to the show, sir. I'm really, really glad to have you.
Thank you for having me, Buck. I'm glad to be here.
So we'll get into a lot of stuff. I've got all kinds of questions. And I should lead in by telling my audience that I know you because you're the priest at the local Orthodox Church I've been attending as of late here in Lockhart. I could not believe it that there's one in my small little town. So I should also say, when I start really delving into a topic, it only takes a few months to where you turn back and look and go, man, I knew nothing about it at first. So I might look back at some of the things I ask you here in 2 months and go, oh man, why did I ask that? But nonetheless, here we are.
No problem.
Let's get into your background. I heard it on another podcast, and it's really interesting. And of course, out of all these people listening, there's probably not a ton of Orthodox priests. So how does one get to what you're doing right now?
Oh, wow. Well, it's been, as they say, a long, strange trip. I grew up kind of split between San Antonio, Texas, and Des Moines, Iowa. My dad was a television meteorologist, Mike Lozano, and some of the older folks may remember that name from his appearances on TV. And always attended Roman Catholic schools, grade school, high school. My undergraduate was at St. Mary's in San Antonio, which is run by the Marianists, dear sweet folks that they are. And then I went to grad school at Loyola for the first go-round, and then most recently at Creighton, and they're a Jesuit institution. And so for the longest time, I was Roman Catholic. My wife had grown up very traditionally Roman Catholic. And when we got together, we tried attending the local Roman Catholic parish, just it wasn't a good fit for us for whatever reason. And we tried looking around at various other parishes. We looked at the Presbyterians. We looked at the Episcopal Church, and that was kind of a good fit, sort of high church. But that was around the same time that the politics of the Episcopal Church went way, way left very, very fast, faster than we were comfortable with. And so we got into a movement that is called the Continuing Anglican Movement, which is kind of the old school version of the Episcopalians. But we were in there for about 5 years. We had a moderately successful mission. I was assigned to a few parishes, most recently in New Braunfels. And we kind of got to the point where we weren't sure what the continuing folks were actually continuing anymore. And so we decided to move on from there. And as part of this sort of where do I want to go, what do I want to do, I reread the Acts of the Apostles, and I started rereading the early church fathers, and I said, I want to be what they are. And as I'm looking around at the Anglican church that I was in at the time, I said, and this ain't it. And so there's got to be something a little closer to that. And, growing up in the West, we're taught that, well, all those places that Paul wrote to, they're long gone. They've crumbled into dust. Maybe the archaeologists have interest in them. And you go, wait a minute, there's still a bishop of that same church that he started that can trace it all the way back to him writing to them. And so really started to heavily look into Orthodoxy. And I actually came into the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, or ROKOR as we call it, it's a bit of a mouthful, under their Western Rite provision. So I was still doing a Western liturgy, which is kind of like what you would see in a traditional Tridentine Latin Mass, but I was doing it with Orthodox theology. And that honestly is a pretty hard sell in small town Texas, where you've got a Roman Catholic Church, you've got an Episcopal Church, and there really wasn't just enough to differentiate us. And so as we spoke to folks, they say, well, this liturgy is pretty, but it's kind of the same as we get down here, and we know everybody, and they've got a bigger building and better coffee. And so we explored, and I had to learn the Eastern Rite, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, from scratch, basically, which is significantly different. You can tell little bits and pieces of it that have made it into the modern Western liturgies, but significantly different. And we became an Eastern Rite parish, and this was about 5-ish years ago now. I've been an Orthodox priest for about 8.5 years. This was about 5 years ago. And we found the space that we are now located in, and we have quadrupled in growth, really quite a bit, especially during the pandemic season.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about the pandemic season. Do you think you exploded somewhat in growth then because people looked around and said, this is the only place I can go to? Or I have a theory a little bit because there's a let's say, emerging curiosity in Orthodox Christianity and some of the political circles that I find myself in. And one reason I think is happening is because it seems like historically, for whatever reason, people seem to turn to Orthodoxy when things get super crappy, and at least in the studies. Yeah. So why do you think your little parish started to grow like that?
Well, I think it was really a combination of things. One, I think during the pandemic, the people that were home a lot more had a lot more time to hopefully pray, but certainly reflect about things, maybe do some additional reading, delve into, now that we can't go to church, is it something that we miss in our lives? As they look around and they see their families and everybody's getting lots of togetherness time, maybe they see that as there should be something else. There's that something missing that they want to try and fill. So I think that's part of it, is people just sort of getting to do a little more soul searching, a little more research, hopefully a little more reading about it, and maybe reaching out electronically. I know I had a number of people reach out and contact me during the pandemic, just say, Father, I'm reading about this. What else can you tell me? Could I come and see it? So that's one thing. I think another thing is everybody else was closed. And so we were ordered by our Archbishop, out of an abundance of caution, to have a minimal number of folks there, but he didn't really establish what that was, and that we should take, sensible precautions, not go overboard. And so we had myself, our choir master at the time, one of our readers, who is one of the minor orders of clergy, who is kind of important in keeping the parish running and making sure we stay on the right liturgical schedule, and then a server. And the four of us, I kind of dubbed them the away team, is we became this life of the parish for the time. And we live streamed on Facebook, and we did what we had to do to get through that. But our doors never physically shut. At any time during the pandemic, anyone could have come in, and indeed they did, both our parishioners and other folks from the community. And they said, you're not closed down. I said, well, no, we never did, and we never are going to. And so that was one aspect of it in the church side of it. The other aspect of it is we were also the only ones that kept our food pantry open. Mm. And so during the worst of the pandemic, and especially during the snowpocalypse last year, we were it. And we had people showing up, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. Some folks hadn't eaten in a number of days. Some folks hadn't been able to find a place to take a shower, any of these types of things. And they said, everybody's locked. They had gone to the Roman Catholic Church, doors are locked. They had gone to the Methodist Church, doors are locked. Gone to the Lutheran Church, doors are locked. And they came and knocked on ours, and they said they were about ready to give up, and we were able to feed them. And they said, well, do I need to attend a service? So we'd love for you to, but you don't have to. We're going to feed you regardless. And so you get this tiny little parish that probably is the poorest in an already poor county, and we're feeding all these people that we're meeting for the very first time. So that was cool. And people started to take notice of that. And at one point, during the massive ice and snowstorm, we were completely wiped out. We had nothing left because we had said, hey, we've got diapers, we've got shelf-stable milk, we've got clean drinking water, all these types of things. And I walked over to the parish because it's a couple blocks away, and I expected a couple people will be there. We had a line down the alley. And so we fed all of these dozens of people and provided for their babies and this and that. And my wife was over there and helping to take care of these people and get them through in an orderly manner. And I put a note out on Facebook and I said, hey, we were just wiped out. If anybody can help us out, we'd really appreciate it. And the outpouring of love and support from that was tremendous. Not only our own folks, but Orthodox people in other areas of the country, people who have never had any experience of religion, good or bad, are sending checks, sending food, and we were able to keep that going throughout that entire time. So that was just a really great gift. So I think being open was the biggest part of it. But another thing is we go to great lengths to really be visible in our community. And so during the pandemic, which I don't know if it's official, I'm calling it over. We stopped, praying for the pandemic because it's over for all intents and purposes. But during this, we would do cross processions down through the town square. We're right on about a block off the county courthouse square, and we've got a lovely old courthouse with a nice sidewalk around it. And we would get everybody out of the church, and they'd grab an icon off the walls, or they'd grab a crucifix, and they'd grab, whatever, and we'd sling holy water over the whole place, and we'd be singing psalms as we're going throughout the town. And it was interesting because, we got your regular looks of what a bunch of weirdos, but we also got people that would stop and, maybe they'd cross themselves as they're in there, or maybe they'd bow their heads or say thank you or something. But it was this kind of, oh, that's different. And, to compare that, not necessarily to dig on them, a lot of the folks that I spoke to and a lot of the other pastors, they were doing outdoor mask-only services and everybody's, 10 feet apart. And it just, I don't think folks really wanted that. If I think a couple of these folks, if they could have gone to full hazmat suits, they would have. But, we never changed. We never masked. We have masks available in the parish, the N95 and the whole 9 yards. And I think maybe 2 are missing out of the box because one of the infants in the parish likes to pluck them out of there. But nobody ever masked. Nobody ever changed the way that we received communion during this whole thing. And for those of your listeners unfamiliar with Eastern Orthodoxy, we commune out of a common chalice with a common spoon that goes into everybody's mouth, then back into mine, and then I finish the contents reverently because we believe that it is the body and blood of Christ. Nobody ever got sick. And, we very fervently believe that you cannot get sick from Holy Communion. Now, can you get sick being in the church with someone? If they're sick, sure you can. We don't deny basic science. I mean, if somebody's coughing up a storm and they cough on you, you're probably getting whatever they have. But the issue of communion was so central to us that we never wanted to break it. And in other areas of the country, other jurisdictions, they were talking about, well, what if we got plastic spoons for everybody? Or what if you brought your spoon from home? Or, what if we were to douse it in Everclear between each serving and so on? And I was very thankful for our hierarchs. And they said, no, we're not doing that. We've done this for 2,000 years, throughout plagues, through all kinds of different things. Nobody gets sick from the Eucharist. And so I was very grateful that we were able to continue with that. And I think we had an even mix of people who either thought we were crazy or said, there's something going on here and I want to be a part of it too. And I'd like to think it's that second part that really helped us grow.
Yes, that second part is kind of what led me to you guys. There's this pure, for lack of a better term, like a hardcore vibe from Orthodoxy, and I mean that as a compliment, like a purity that remains unchanged despite modern inconveniences and modern times that I think is wonderful. Do you see that as well? I assume so.
I do. I think especially in everything is so political now, as you are well aware, given the nature of your podcast. But I think with the politicization, I'm going to butcher that one, of everything, I think Orthodoxy to a great extent, not 100% of course, but to a great extent has remained removed from that. That we're able to say that this issue, while it may be political beyond the church doors, in here it's just a matter of our faith, and we're not going to submit. I've told people before, we're kind of coming kicking and screaming into the 10th century, and that very much is the way it is we don't change to fit the times. We present the current times with a model that they might look to improve their own relationship with God and with one another. Are there liberals and conservatives within Orthodoxy? Certainly. A lot of us, I think, are probably on the more conservative side, just given the nature of the church and some of the stringency with which it is run. But there are certainly people who hold liberal positions as well. And I think a lot of that it's tied to politics is not of God. There is one of the phrases that we use, put not your faith in princes and sons of men in whom there is no salvation. What are we saying to people? We're saying, put your faith in the church instead.
Yes.
And so, when we take this kind of hardline approach to things, people say, well, maybe I was a little more of a leftist when I was young. I'm a little more conservative when I'm old. But regardless of any of those factors, the church stays the same. So I think in a lot of ways, we're providing kind of a constant for people's lives, given the ebb and flow of all the political type stuff that goes on around us.
Yeah, when I first spoke with you, I kind of referenced the Orthodox tradition in communist Russia back in the day, and that communism tried to stamp out the tradition, of course, and someone referenced they still are. And you said you won't find a group of people that dislikes communism more than we do, which is also an attractive sentiment to myself and a lot of listeners. Can you talk about kind of the experience of Orthodoxy within communist Russia and kind of what it went through?
So I'm probably not the best one to speak on that, simply because I didn't experience it personally, but I have served a lot of parishes that have a significant Russian population, but also we kind of forget, the rest of the Soviet countries there are plenty of, Moldovans, Romanians, Bulgarians, and Lithuanians and so on that all lived under this and had this very real experience of having their life state-run, up to and including their religious expression. There's a wonderful movie that I like to refer everybody to, and that is Ostrov. It means the island in Russian. And it tells the story of this monk who was a Russian sailor in World War II. And I won't spoil the story, but it switches to an island that he is on, and there's this monastery, and it takes place during communist times. So people are really struggling to come and see him and to receive healing from him and to experience this monastery life. And everything is very tightly controlled by the Soviets. I think what we're seeing is, with at least a lot of the people I've met who lived under communism, is they hate communism because they know just how bad it is. And then a lot of them come to the United States and they see, millennial college students going, we need communism. And they go, no, you don't. You want anything but that. And, all the regular arguments of, well, it's never really been tried and it could work here and we'll do it better than they did. And, these folks are just dumbfounded that how could anyone be so ignorant as to want communism? And so I say there's a very strong anti-communist strain within, I think, Orthodoxy in general, but also within Russian Orthodoxy particularly, because we've seen what happens. And we see the martyrs of communism, all the way from the Tsar martyr and his family, all the way up well through Stalin and beyond, that have suffered under this, and we certainly want to avoid it.
I want to ask you some stuff that people will probably wonder if they are not familiar with Orthodoxy, and this is how I was going into it. I was raised Protestant in general, non-denominational, basically. And
so Baptist-costal.
What is it?
Baptist-costal.
Yeah, there you go. And so as I was drawn to Orthodoxy, I still remember walking into the St. Andrew's Parish, and the whole thing was completely different than anything I had ever been a part of. I think if people come from a Catholic background, some of the stuff visually will look maybe some similar, and some of the candles and whatnot. But boy, If you went to a mega church, which I did when I was younger, in San Antonio, I'm sure you're familiar with the one, and this is just like nothing I've ever experienced, and it's so beautiful. It's so different. The like the senses are awakened quickly, which is
Oh,
good
yeah.
because it's 9 a.m. and I can be a little bit tired at that hour. Can you talk about some of the differences that you know between, let's say, just Protestantism in general and Orthodox Christianity, including the Divine Liturgy and what people see visually and whatnot?
Sure. Well, one of the things that you notice when walking into an Orthodox church is the big wall that kind of separates the nave, that is the main part of the church, from the altar, which is where I guess all the churchy stuff happens, where the priest is, the servers are, and so on. And that wall is called the iconostasis, and it just means icon stand. And it's broken up by royal doors, which are in the center, and deacon's doors on either side. And one of the things that is very significant about that is just the placement of that altar space. Is we still consider it a very holy place. You don't go in there unless you have a good reason. I don't go in there unless I have a good reason, but nobody else goes in there except by invitation or to serve or to do something very important for the liturgy. All of our lamps are olive oil and beeswax, which has been used for thousands of years for the same purposes. And so we will tend to do that. The incense that we use is all very natural. You mentioned your senses being awakened. You're going to see the icons. You'll smell the incense. You'll hear the choir. You'll taste the antiteron, which is the blessed bread and wine, not the communion, but the antiteron. It means like a consolation if you can't take the communion. So it really has all of your senses. We're standing for most of the service if we're physically able to. And so you can't be passively Orthodox, I don't think. The environment is not such that allows for it. And, my mother grew up as a Disciples of Christ Protestant. And the first time she came in, she had a couple of comments. One was, "Don't you have a shorter service?" And I said, "Mom, this is the shorter service." And the second one was, she's like, it was so chaotic. Everybody was just walking all around and going everywhere. And I go, yes, because they're lighting candles, they're reverencing icons, they're talking to the choir, they're doing all these things, but they're doing it all with a focus on God. And I think that's one of the places where it really separates from the Protestantism in a very important way I was in a Protestant church most recently, probably 6 months ago for some such thing. It wasn't a religious service, but central to it was the pulpit. And that struck me because in an Orthodox service, in our Divine Liturgy, the centrality is always on Christ, always on the Holy Communion. And the sermon, we don't always even give them, but if we do, they're usually 5-10 minutes. We're talking about the gospel, possibly the epistle, maybe if there's a notable saint of that day. And the last time I was at a Protestant worship service, I was sitting there. It was an ecumenical type thing, and one of our canons says you may not pray with or celebrate with Protestants or Roman Catholics. But I said I'll give the opening prayer, and then y'all take it from there. But I sat and listened, and the preacher was giving his sermon, and afterwards he says, "Well, what'd you think? That's a little different than you guys." I said, "That was the best 4 or 5 sermons I've heard in a long time." Because it went on for nearly an hour. And, we kind of joke back and forth about that, but our focus really is on what's taking place on the altar table itself. And that is the holy mysteries of communion, where we take our elements of bread and wine and we believe that they become the body and blood of Christ. And we urge everybody else to believe. And just in case you're not sure, when we come out to give communion to folks, we're going to say, "I believe that," and we're all saying this together. So it's assured that we're all on the same page. One of the criticisms that Orthodoxy sometimes gets is that we don't have open communion. So you can go to, say, a Presbyterian church, a Methodist church, a Lutheran church, and it's probably open communion when they have it, because it's not every week like we do. Right. And, it may be King's Hawaiian rolls and Welch's grape juice or whatever, but everybody can get up there and take it. And that's not to denigrate that. In their tradition, that's very beautiful because they believe that's a memorial of Christ and it's just, bread and wine and what have you. In ours, we say, unless you believe what we believe, you really shouldn't take this because it's dangerous to your soul and your salvation. And so we hold it, I guess, above and apart from the regular practice. Now, as it contrasts with the Roman Catholic service, I think it's a little bit different. The Divine Liturgy has often been said is we lift the entire church up to heaven to worship with us, because the choir is singing, and the whole thing is really a conversation between the priest and the laity. The choir is there to give you the tones, but all of the laity should be singing the responses, the Lord have mercies, and so on. In the Roman Church, it's much more of you are witness to I don't want to say a show because that sounds derogatory, and I don't intend it that way, but it's much less participatory, I think. You can sit in a pew and you can watch what's taking place, and maybe you go up for communion, maybe you don't. Whereas you almost can't escape celebration in an Orthodox Divine Liturgy because you are right there in the middle of it, and it is taking place all around you, and there's nowhere to go.
Yes, I can definitely second that. The first couple of times I felt, as someone who's slightly wider sometimes than other people, I felt like, oh my God, I'm in this person's way. Who's this new guy? He's right in the way, you know. But let's see, we can go so many places with this because I have, like I said, I have a lot of questions about this. A lot of it's just for myself, it seems like. But let's talk about the icons, because that's one of the things that was so much different than I had experienced before. And so I guess I can broadly ask about them, but I would like to know, generally, I believe they're saints most of the time, but I don't believe Seraphim Rose has been considered a saint yet, and I know that he's on the icons. Okay. How does it work with people talking to icons / saints, praying to them? Talk about that.
So the icons are an essential part of Orthodox worship. And I say essential because it is really part of the essence of what we do and the way in which we do it. It was reestablished at one of the early church councils. And so it's something that's very near and dear to us. And I think a lot of people come into an Orthodox church and they see the icons and they go, oh my goodness, it's idolatry. And we go, no, it's not. Because we are not worshiping the icon. At the end of the day, the icon is just, wood and paint, possibly canvas, paper, what have you. There is nothing intrinsically godly in the icon other than the person that it represents. So one way of looking at this from a theological perspective is that every icon really represents someone whose faith was perfected in Christ. One of the words that kind of gets bandied about sometimes is theosis. We try and become godlike. And that is certainly our goal. And most of us, myself included, of course, fall far short of that. But in those icons, we see someone who didn't fall short of it, at least not at the important time. So yes, they may have been a sinner, they may have been a warrior, they may have been whatever they happen to be. But when the time came, their faith in Christ was unparalleled for that time. And so we feel that it's worthy to lift them up in a way, to praise them. A lot of our Traparia and Cantakia, that is the hymns that we use, are for those saints. And it's not saying you're God. It's saying you represent something that I hope I can be. And to that end, there are icons of saints that have not been officially canonized. So we don't have the same process as the Romans. From what I recall from Roman theology, you have to have had so many numbers of miracles. It has been such an amount of time has elapsed, and this and that, and then it has to go up essentially for a vote. We don't do that. Saints traditionally, and this would have been the ancient practice of the Romans that they moved away from at some point, were by acclamation or by intercession. And so there have been cases where an example would be someone has reposed who is a very saintly, very holy person, and people have prayed intentions saying, please bring my intention before God to that person, and gradually they become sainted. Now, the Seraphim Rose icon we have in the parish, it could be, I suppose, controversial to some, but a lot of people, I think, who have read his writings realize this was a very saintly man who we were gifted to have live among us for a time and has gone home to God. Now, as far as talking to saints, I don't think anybody's having a conversation with the icons per se, but I liken it to it as no different than asking a friend, Buck, will you please pray for me? I'm going through a difficult time. Please, in your prayers, consider me as an intention. And to a great extent, that really is the relationship of the icons in the church. Is they remind us, and my icon wall is right over here. I could turn you around a little bit, but it reminds us of, while I'm praying, such a miserable sinner that I am, these guys made it, and gals. And I have hope to be like them. I have hope that my own poor witness might be worthy of their sacrifice. And so I think that's a lot of it. And it's one of those things, and there's much deeper theology that we could go into, but it's probably not the best place for it. But as far as why those icons are good, it's kind of one of those things that we encourage people to come and see. In medieval churches, they spoke about the stained glass being sort of the Bible for the illiterate. This is very much that same idea of when you come into an Orthodox church and you stare at the altar, you'll see on the right an icon of Christ, on the left an icon of the Theotokos, the Mother of God, literally means God-bearer. Above, you see the Last Supper, and out from under that Last Supper icon are the royal doors where the priest is going to bring communion. And so when we say this is like the Last Supper, that reminds you of that. When we say we are doing this to Christ our God, Christ is right there. And so it's an important part of our worship that we include these types of things and that we do our very best to reverence them. Now, there are instances in which icons have miraculous occurrences. We were recently privileged to be visited by the Iveron icon of the Mother of God that streams myrrh. And it's always kind of fun it streams so much myrrh that they need towels to sop it up. And people who have been there have said, how do you pump the myrrh through the wood? And the father who goes around with it, who travels with it, says, we don't. Well, how do you get it to come out and go through the glass? He goes, we don't. It's a mystery. And it's one of those things that I think is probably the biggest thing to wrap our heads around, but also differentiates us from Roman Catholicism, from Protestantism, is instead of trying to find a scientific or a very specific explanation for why this occurs, we just go, it's mysterious. God is great.
Yeah, fair.
I like that.
Fair enough. I think someone gave me a small card with an icon when I was there once, and I think it had something to do with the one you were just referencing.
Yes, I think that was the Iveron icon, and it had been touched to the original.
Yes, excellent. The best part about having PalomaVerdeCBD.com as a sponsor is not even that the products are amazing, because they are. That's not even the best part. It's once you order these products and use them over and over, you know, because I'm telling you, that you're supporting a truly good couple, the people behind PalomaVerdeCBD.com, Carlos and Vanessa out of San Antonio. Very wonderful people, hardworking, and very much like-minded. And they're providing you these wonderful products, the mint CBD tinctures. Check this out, the sleep bundle. I know sometimes some of you have issues sleeping. It's very common these days. You won't once you buy their sleep bundle. They've got the CBD gummies, of course. They've got soft gels, salve sticks. I've ranted and raved many times about the cool menthol sports cream. Those of you guys and ladies that work out and lift and you get a little sore, I'm telling you, this is the absolute best sports cream I've ever used. And you've heard it many times, but I can't brag enough on their pet products, the CBD dog chews and the pet CBD tinctures. Both of my French bulldogs, George and Lux, both use these products. They may not know they use them, but I can tell you, Lux is the old one. He used to kind of waddle around like a little old man French bulldog. I put the CBD tinctures on his food every morning, and now he can actually keep up with his younger brother George, who darts around the yard and chases squirrels. But I put these CBD dog chews and the pet tinctures in their food every morning and every evening. You will not be sorry if you give these guys business. Help out your sleep, your muscles, your anxiety. They've got stuff for that, of course, and your pets. Everything here is wonderful and good, as are the people behind the business. And of course, since they support this show and you listen to this show, you get 25% off your entire order when you type in promo code BUCK. That's me, of course, BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout. Get you 25% off of your order when you go over to palomaverdecbd.com. Please give these great people some business. You will not be sorry. And you're helping out the Counterflow podcast. You're helping us keep the lights on, as they say. That's palomaverdecbd.com, promo code BUCK. Get you 25% off. Let's get back to the show. Can we talk about, you mentioned Theotokos, how she's viewed within the Orthodox Church?
The Theotokos within Orthodoxy is considered, the mother of God, she who gave up her life to bring God into the world. And so she is viewed very reverently. We don't have the same Mariology as, say, Roman Catholics. So we don't say that she is a co-redemptress or a co-mediatrix or anything like that. But rather, we do feel that she was ever virgin. And so that is mentioned throughout the hymns and so on that are sung to her and that are sung in the church on her saints' days. But she is the mother of the entire church. Behind the altar, kind of on the back wall above the bishop's throne, is a portrait, an icon called the Panagia. And it means overreaching or reaching over all. And it essentially is Mary, the mother of God, the Theotokos, holding the Christ child as an infant. And there are lots of Trinitarian symbols on there and all that kind of thing. But it gives the idea of she is holding the world because it has been dedicated unto her. And so it's I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and if there's anything you can finish that with, because I want to ask about God, Christ, right after this.
Yes, by all means, go ahead and get into God, and we'll see where we come back to.
Christ as three, fully human, fully divine God. Can you break that down for people that might come at this from an atheist point of view and they don't even understand this part of it?
Absolutely. We say in our Nicene Creed, so when the Council of Nicaea was decided what we were going to say we believe, because people from kind of watching Hallmark movies and things like that, they get the idea that Jesus was around, he was crucified, he resurrected, he rose, the apostles kind of walked around, did their thing, and then nothing happens till Martin Luther comes around 1,500 years later. And it's unfortunate because in the early days of the church, there were hundreds of Christianities, plural, all vying to be Christianity. And what emerges as Orthodoxy takes a while, takes about 3 centuries. Now, were there Orthodox Christians prior to that? Of course. We say, proclaiming the truth since 33 AD. But there were different beliefs that Christ was either fully man or only God and not really man. And so finally, around 325, this council is convened and they say, we're going to get it together right here, right now, what we believe that God is, what the church is, and so on. And that became the Nicene Creed that you can hear recited in every Orthodox church every week. Now, within that, we believe that God is fully God. We believe that God is fully man in the form of Jesus Christ, that he came to the earth for our salvation, that he suffered, that he actually died, because there were Christianities that believed that he didn't really die. For instance, Islam, which is questionably a Christian heresy itself, because it came out of Nestorianism, believes that Jesus did not actually die on the cross. Now, they believe that Jesus is the Word of God and God's prophet and this and that he'll come back at the end, but they don't believe that he died. We believe that he did suffer, he did die, he descended into Hades. On the 3rd day, he rose again in fulfillment of the scriptures. Because if we go back and we look at a lot of the prophets, they say this is going to happen, and lo and behold, it happened. Now, wrapping your head around being fully God and fully man at the same time, that's one of those things that has plagued dogmatic theologians for centuries, and you can read reams of paper all covered with how they reconcile that. I think the answer for a lot of people, and it's not necessarily a satisfying one, is we believe it. Now, one of my favorite philosophers to read, Soren Kierkegaard, was an existentialist writing in the 19th century. And he said that leap of faith is one of the most important things that we can do. So if we start thinking about God and we go, well, this can't possibly be, or this fails my personal logic or my understanding of how things work or the limitations of the natural and supernatural world, some people would say, well, I can't reconcile it. I guess I'm an atheist. What Kierkegaard said, and what I find really compelling about this, is the fact that you cannot prove it is really the compelling part. And that's why we ought to believe it. And if we believe it, that's when really kind of interesting things start happening in terms of our life, our faith, our beliefs, and what we're willing to support and what we're willing to say. And ultimately, should we find ourselves opportunities to be martyrs, what we're willing to die for. And that's really something. Now we could just say, well, I don't know, it works. But we're saying, I believe. I don't fully understand, but I believe. And that to me is something it's really pretty incredible. And that is by no means is that the sole dominion of Orthodox Christians. Hopefully every good Christian can say, I don't understand it, but I believe it. I would like to think that where we are differentiated is, having said we don't understand it, we don't then try to explain it.
Yes. Can you, that's exactly where I wanted to go with it. I love what you just said. Let's go down that route a little bit, because that's another thing that I've learned about Orthodoxy that I like, that sentence you just said. And I think we can relate that to mysticism a little bit, because that term gets thrown around a lot with Orthodoxy. Let's go into what you just said.
Well, what you have is around the time of, say, the 11th century into the 14th or so, you've got a movement within Roman Catholicism called scholasticism, which was an attempt to rationalize the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. So to provide some context, in 1054, the Roman Catholic Church left the Orthodox Church and became its own thing. Now, if you ask a Roman Catholic, they're going to say the Orthodox churches, they left us. Tomato, tomato, neither here nor there. There are significant reasons, though, to say that they left.
That's known as the schism, correct?
Yes, that is a great schism. Okay. And so what you have there is you've got the Orthodox who are basically continuing what they're doing, lamenting the loss of Rome. We do pray that the church will someday be one. Now, how that's going to come about is well above my pay grade, thankfully. But we do pray that the church will someday be one. Meanwhile, the Roman Catholics are kind of reeling from this, and in isolation, they're redefining a lot of what they believe, a lot of how they think, a lot of how they worship, and a lot of the liturgies from there. You can kind of see they took the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom or something very similar to it and said, well, we'll tweak it here, we'll change it there, we'll, switch it from Greek to Latin and see where it goes. But along with that were new ways of thinking about how we ought to understand our faith. And a lot of this comes across with guys like Duns Scotus, with Robert Grosseteste, Peter Abelard. And it's really when you get to Aquinas that it kind of hits its height. I would say if you were to pick up the Baltimore Catechism, which is what Roman Catholics traditionally are supposed to believe, it's what they teach and what they believe, probably about 60% of that is verbatim Thomas Aquinas. And Aquinas is coming out of this really interesting tradition. He's kind of at the confluence of a lot of things. Is the West is getting back all of those lost documents that they didn't remember. All of the Aristotle, the Plato, the Herodotus, all of this that in the East has been maintained. So you've still got all the Greek in the East, all the Greek philosophy, plus you've got the influence of the Muslim commentators like Averroes, Al-Farabi, Avicenna. They're going to take those works, comment on it, and through Moorish incursions into Spain and through the Crusades, this stuff is gradually going to be plopped back down at the West. So you're Thomas Aquinas, you're sitting there in the 13th century, you've got this massive work of Greek philosophy that's been translated into Latin, converted by the Muslims for a belief in one God, and boom, right on you. And if the Greeks were anything back in the days, they were taxonomists first and foremost. They wanted to categorize everything as best they possibly could. They wanted to understand it in as finite a way as humanly possible. And a lot of that then leaks into Roman theology at that time, where they're saying, no, there has to be a process. We believe that bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Christ, but we believe it's through transubstantiation, and it's at this exact moment, and these steps must be taken. Whereas back east, and still today, and those of us in the Eastern churches, we're saying we believe it happens and it is a mystery and a gift of God, rather than trying to say, here are the steps, here is the place. So a little bit different.
Yes, that's great. Another thing I've noticed that's different that I was not familiar with before is there's a lot of emphasis on the fathers of the church.
Yes.
And can you get into some of that? And it's this book, for those of the people that are watching this, not just listening. See, if you're just listening, I'm not going to tell you what the book is, but early on in it, there's a whole section on the church fathers and why that's different for Orthodoxy. And so I'd like to ask you about that.
Sure. So the early church fathers, they're usually split up into the ante and the post-Nicene fathers. So those that were writing before the Council of Nicaea and those that were writing after, and then there's some later fathers and so on. Essentially what this was is you had the very first books of the New Testament to be written are the epistles. Okay. And you've got Acts, then you've got the Gospels, Revelation, so on. So this is taking place between, sometime after 33 AD, probably closer to 50, all the way up to 120 AD or so, thereabouts. Anno Domini, year of our Lord, not after death. If you had a history teacher tell you AD stood for after death, find them and slap them. But you've got these books being written that will eventually, not for a while yet, but eventually become the New Testament. And there are a lot of other books that are written during there. There's Gospels of Peter and Gospels of Thomas and Gospels of Mary Magdalene. And for whatever reasons, they were left out of the canon of Scripture, frequently because they would have, they're called the Gnostic Gospels, but they aren't all Gnostic. Some of them have Gnostic overtones. Gnosis means knowledge, and it was an idea that you could get knowledge through kind of esoteric, weird ways. But what you have happening is those letters, those epistles, those Gospels are written. Not everybody has access to all of them. So we know some communities only use, say, the Gospel of John or the Gospel of Luke. And so this group of the fathers, this patristic writing from the Latin patri, father, they're writing going, here is what I understand these scriptures to mean, or this is what this epistle means. Or they are very much in the emulation of St. Paul, writing to their own communities. So in my own case, I took the name Father Ignatius for St. Ignatius of Antioch, who was taken to his martyrdom. He was about to be eaten alive by wild beasts, and he knew it. And he was writing to his churches saying, these are the things that you need to be aware of. These are the things that have first importance. These are the things that you need to carry forward as part of our faith. And we are blessed in that we have a lot of those writings of him and other church fathers. We have a significant body of these writings. They kind of end around the time of Augustine in the Western understanding, so about 420 AD or so, possibly a little later than that. I don't remember exactly, but around that time. And so you've got these massive volumes of people writing both to their communities and about the scriptures, commentaries on them, trying to understand the history of the church and its impact during persecution from Rome and beyond. And as I said, with the Western churches, it basically stops there. Is they don't go to, I know where I was thinking 420, because that was when Jerome translated the Latin Vulgate. So Augustine went a bit beyond that. They're not doing a whole lot more. Now, in the Orthodox Church, we have fathers writing today. Now, this is not to say that they are the same types of writings as those, but there are elders. One of my personal favorites to read, Elder Thaddeus of Bictovnica, and we have a copy of his works at the church if you'd like to borrow it. But all of these wonderful guys writing, thinking about the Gospels, thinking about the church, holding up both scripture and tradition and saying, with these two things together, here's how we understand our faith, but here's also how we parse our faith to those outside of it. And so essentially, a lot of the church fathers' writings are kind of an extended apology, not an I'm sorry, but a apologia, an explanation of this is what I believe and this is what I want to share with you. Orthodoxy has received a fair amount of due criticism because we are terrible evangelists. We're just not good about going out and knocking on doors and saying, hey, come to your local Orthodox church. What we are good at, though, is keeping things the way they have been and being present in our world and in our community. So when you see us walking around the square doing a cross procession, people go, well, that's different. But if they look a bit into that, they see something that has roots in ancient Judaism and even before. And so keeping that ancient history going is a lot of the work of the fathers there, maintaining that. And then that's passed along to us as modern parishes in saying, share this with your community. Don't keep this for yourselves. It's too good.
What are your thoughts on the Enlightenment?
Oh,
I mean, I know, I just from what I know of you, you could probably do weeks on this maybe, but
yeah.
In some, I suppose.
So the Enlightenment was a reaction to and rejection of scholasticism. So if scholasticism was the attempt to rationalize the teachings of the Roman Church, the Enlightenment comes along and is at once wonderful, but also very troublesome in that it actually, I think it reflects in a lot of important ways, a lot of what we're seeing today, where people say, I'm going to cleave completely to science, whatever that may be, to the rejection of anything even vaguely mystical, esoteric, religious, what have you. And they did that, and they did it moderately successfully. You know, with you've got figures like Francis Bacon, he's up here somewhere, Isaac Newton, and all these wonderful thinkers, but they strip away a lot of the fundamental human beauty, but also a lot of the substance to what we knew as a world at that time. My favorite time to talk about is actually the Romantic era, which comes after that, which is a reaction to and rejection of the Enlightenment, where you've got guys like Goethe and Schiller and Kant, and they're saying they missed it. If you, their criticism of Newton, for instance, was that he was too reductionistic, that he tried to take everything down to a mechanical relationship of A impacts B and brings about C, and he missed the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So, you know, they can look at a novel and they go, well, yes, this is very well written. It has all the parts that we believe a novel should have, but they can't tell you why you enjoy reading that novel. So the Enlightenment, in a way, you know, we are very much children of the Enlightenment today, especially if you look around at all of the, you know, the things surrounding the pandemic, is people are saying we have to implicitly trust the science, and science is settled. Well, if science is done well, it's never settled.
Right.
Because science ought to be continually changing. Now, people have criticized that, you know, there's a lot of flip-flop in the scientific explanation of what's going on and how best we ought to deal with it. But that flip-flop is actually, that's kind of a sign that things are going better, is we're continuing to learn and not just remaining stagnant. Whereas scholasticism said, this is our belief, this is what we're going to do to uphold it, and we're going to shore everything up against that and never question it. The Enlightenment said, question everything. The Romantic era then said, well, question everything, but look at those aspects that have a human touch to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Enlightenment, it gets by without us. You know, Isaac Newton, without the human aspect of it, mechanics still do mechanical things. If we want to go beyond that, really experience the richness of life, we can't just stop at mechanical explanations and especially not of our faith.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes something that it really ought not to be.
There's almost when you're referencing trust the science, we hear so much of that these days, to where it's almost like they look at it in a religious light, like you mentioned earlier, I just believe it. And this is just a voice telling them something from the TV that could be getting paid from who knows where, which corporations and whatnot. And there are people now, maybe because of the Enlightenment, are looking at certain things in a religious manner, almost their own mystical way, that's not the actual true religion that they should be looking at in a mystical way. Do you see that?
I do. And I think a lot of that is, you know, there's a logical fallacy called scientism,
yes,
which I think very much comes into play here. And a lot of people really either they don't realize they're doing it or they don't want to believe that they're doing it. Either way it goes. And so they've accepted these scientific truths, some of which are true, sure. They've accepted them as unquestionable, which defeats the grounding of science itself. Whereas within a religious context, we look at things that are doctrine, that we can be taught, literally the root of the word is doxis, teaching, versus dogma, those things that we are taught, but we also don't question. They are taking in a large way these scientific guesses, because we really don't have a whole lot of data on things. I mean, just not enough sample size. and they are ascribing a level of dogma to it. And that's a very dangerous thing to do, is if anyone tells you, well, you can't question that, that should be a very big red flag for, no, I'm going to question this even more now.
I want to talk a little bit more about Seraphim Rose, because
Okay.
he has been a major component in me finding, well, you, basically, this church and so on. I have become at least acquaintances with the gentleman that's been on my show multiple times, who's deep into Orthodoxy now.
Mhm.
And he kept talking about it. We'd talk about other stuff, then he'd go back to it. It was curious to me. So offline one day I said, maybe it was during a podcast, I can't remember, but he basically said, read Father Seraphim Rose. And it's a little pamphlet, and I'm the name's going to escape me. I cannot remember. When I get the outro to this show going, I'll mention what the book was. Very short. And so I got it, read it. Man, it's the human heart. Okay. And
that sounds right.
What is it?
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I get it. Interesting. Within weeks, someone tells me, there's an Orthodox church in Lockhart where you just moved. No. So I find it, and I just keep driving by it, because at first you can't find it. It's in the alley.
Oh, yeah.
But so I keep driving by about once or twice a week and looking. I'm like, there's too much tradition. I don't know enough of it. I don't want to disrespect them by just walking in as kind of an outsider, which I suspect you guys hear that sometimes.
Oh, we love it when people walk in.
I know. Well, I'll get there, because you definitely welcome.
Especially as outsiders.
And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to keep reading. I will go in there. And then I get a random message on Twitter, and I don't want to dox the person, but let's just say you and I both know the person.
Uh-huh.
And he says, hey, I heard you live in Lockhart. I'd like to invite you to St. Andrews. And I was like, what a strange coincidence, this person on Twitter that follows me. And so I said, that's weird. I've been reading about Orthodoxy, and I've been driving by this church, and I was reading Father Seraphim Rose, and he goes, well, he's an icon on our wall.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just strange. I'm like, that's a strange coincidence. And even my wife's like, this can't be a coincidence. That's so random that someone reached out.
If we were Baptists, this is when we would say he moves in mysterious ways. But
yes. Yeah. So Seraphim Rose has been a wonderful kind of guide in learning a lot of this stuff. I know people in my audience by the books that he wrote. What does he represent to you? Because for me, when you look around in the modern world and you see the nihilism that's around us everywhere, which is a lot of the things that's a big topic that Seraphim Rose wrote about. He has a way of kind of explaining how things have become what they are, and maybe a one true way, capital T, to get back to how you should see things, or your faith in things. Can you kind of talk about what he represents to you?
Sure. And I should give the caveat that I am not a Seraphim Rose expert by any stretch of the imagination. I have read some of his writings, but I have not read all of them. And I would like to one of these days, but I also work 2 secular jobs to keep the church going. I think what he ultimately represents to me, and what he represents to a lot of Orthodox Christians, is he very definitely walked the walk. And so we have a person who is very much in the world, very much a part of the world, given to its excesses, given to its temptations, and taking advantage of all of them. I mean, not unlike Blessed Augustine of Hippo did prior to writing his Confessions. And through his own struggle, he found a way to get away from that. And the way that he found was the church, the Orthodox Church. And whereas I think a lot of us, we have the courage or the ability or the financial wherewithal or whatever to say, cool, I'm going to be an Orthodox Christian and I'll keep doing my thing out here. He said, I want to be as close to those desert fathers as I possibly can be. And he lived that life in essentially a hermitage and in a community, but had his place apart from them where he could go and he could study and pray and he could translate. A number of the translations that we use for a lot of things are from Father Seraphim. And it's one of those ways in which our monastics, I don't want to get too far off topic, but one of the things that's kind of overlooked in Orthodoxy is our monastics are so central to what we do. All of our hierarchs, our bishops and our archbishops and our metropolitans and so on are drawn from the ranks of our monastics. One, because married priests don't often have time to oversee entire dioceses, but more importantly, because they are that much closer and that much more in touch with praying for all of us. Our nearest monastic community here is out in Candelia. It's actually run by the Greek Church. And these are men that live and work and pray in community with one another for the betterment of the whole world. And I say that meaning that exactly, the betterment of the whole world, not just Orthodox churches, though certainly they're kind of biased in our favor and they're there to support us. But I believe that our monastics continuing to pray for us is what holds off a lot of the calamity that we would otherwise endure. Because we have these people who have said, whatever temptations I may have suffered, whatever sins I may have partaken in, I'm going to give up my life for the world. And I'm going to go and I'm going to spend my time in prayer and reflection. And Father Seraphim certainly wasn't the first one to do that, certainly hasn't been the last. Thank God he isn't the last, because we need our monastics. But he is a shining example to a lot of us of this is a person in modern America who rejected modernity and voluntarily took on himself this life of piety, of chastity, of humility, of obedience, and is just like I said, a shining light, because I think a lot of us, myself included, I'm not a very good priest. I'd make a terrible monastic, but a lot of us could not do that. And if we could, we would find reasons not to do that. Well, if the time's not right, or I just bought a new car or whatever. And to be able to put all that aside is something that ought to make all of us, no matter what our religious background is, it ought to make all of us sit up and pay closer attention to that person and say, what is it that they see in their private relationship with God that I can learn from?
Does the secular nature in which our society lives in lead, in your opinion, to kind of this search for always something bigger that's not being found by a lot of, because society is so chaotic, especially in the last couple of years, that it seems like everyone's reaching for something and pretending that this one big thing does not exist. Do you see that?
I do. And I think in a great way, we are hardwired to think that there is something greater than us. And those people of religious faith, whatever that faith may be, this is certainly not exclusive to Orthodox Christianity, people of religious faith have found that reality that is greater than them is God. And as you and your wife observed, there are too many coincidences to say that nothing greater than me is leading me to where I'm supposed to be. Now, at the same time, within the secular world, we don't lose that hard wiring. We still want to think of something greater than ourselves, but I think absent a religious inclination to that, we end up finding all kinds of things that certainly shouldn't be greater than ourselves, such as, whether it be money or whether it be power and prestige or influence or what have you. We're finding that thing and we're attaching ourselves to it. And if we find the right thing, I think that can be a wonderful deal, because those of us that have found our way into the church through, ebbs and flows of faith and social circumstance and all kinds of different things, we typically say we have found the pearl of great price. Here we are. We're in the church. We made it. And that mutual friend of ours, and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, that out of all those things out there, all of those possible distractions, we made it here. And there's a certain fulfillment in that. I think that really it calms the soul. It says, wait a minute, you've made it. Now it's time to slow down, to appreciate where you are, to learn about and grow in your faith. I still try and learn about my faith every single day, and I tragically fall short, but I keep going. Whereas I think if we attach ourselves to something like money or prestige, we're always going to be a little short of where we want to be. And we're never going to be quite satisfied in that. And we are continually grasping for something more and never really get to have that here it is. And there's essential a sense, there is essentially a euphoria, maybe a catharsis of finding something and saying, this is what I want to dedicate my life to. And if that something is God, you found it. If that something is something man-made, not even God-made, but man-made, then you're falling tragically short of it. And I think a lot of the inclination in the contemporary world is to say, well, just pick what you want to be when you grow up and focus everything on that. And certainly we all have to make a living. But if we idolize that, that's a much worse idolatry than anything else that we might engage in. That's our modern day golden calf, if you will. And every bit as problematic.
How do you guys, you said you're not so good at going out and saying, hey, come to this church and whatnot. Is there a way in which the Orthodox Church could or should be able to attract more people? Do you see that at all?
I think so. So I was remarking on this at the parish the other day, is that, as you noticed, we are in an alley. We are in a back alley. We're hard to find. We don't have enough money to advertise. We maintain a Facebook page and a web page, but that's about it. And we're visible in the community, and people see us either walking or feeding folks or what have you. But that's about it. I think really what is drawing people to Orthodox Christianity now is, I feel that in the next little while here, we're going to be sort of the last bastion of traditional values. And whether you interpret that to mean social or sexual or political or what have you, is neither here nor there. But you find in a lot of other denominations a tendency to say, well, we're not going to bend to that. We'll bend just a little bit to that. And we can make a concession here, but that's it, no further.
Yes.
And, as you go down that incredibly slippery slope, you end up very far from where you began. I'm going to pick on the Lutherans a little bit. I think if Martin Luther were to see where the modern Lutheran Church has come, and this is not to say all of them, but a great many of them, certainly the parish nearby that I've experienced, I think he would, be a little less inclined to hammer those 95 Theses to the door at Wittenberg. They could go, ooh, maybe not. Maybe I should just work this thing out. But a lot of the change that we see, even in the modern Roman Catholic Church, and a lot of the concessions being made to modernity and to ecumenism and to all these types of things that Orthodoxy says we're not doing that. I think a lot of that, if people really look around, it's going to bring them to us. And so how do we project that? That I don't know. And that if I had gone into marketing, I'd probably be much better at this than having gone into philosophy. But what I think it is ultimately going to come down to is people are going to have to do what a lot of us have done individually, is pop from church to church to church until they say, this one feels right, or this one is one that I can attend and not compromise my values. One of the things that I've spoken with people about is, oftentimes today it's easier to explain what we're not and say, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm a Christian who is okay with this issue or this issue or this issue, and I do this, and I don't really believe that because I don't want to offend anybody. Orthodoxy says, this is what I believe, and I'm very sorry that that upsets you. Let's talk about that, and let me give you some examples of why you might actually believe that as well, or why that it's problematic to give into the world.
Well put. One last, I'll get you out of here quickly. I want to respect your time. You mentioned money and stuff like that. I also noticed this going to St. Andrews. Of course, growing up in a Protestant environment, it's the plate that gets passed around. Everyone puts money in it. Mm-hmm. And it didn't hit me until maybe it was my parents asking me about what the church was like and how do you raise money? I said, I didn't even notice. They didn't ask for any. So how do you guys fund yourselves or raise money? Not raise it, but keep the lights on, let's say.
So we never passed a plate. And in most Orthodox parishes, a plate isn't passed. Some of the more progressive ones, they'll pass the plate. You've got to understand when the first Orthodox immigrants were coming to the U.S., the Greeks and the Lebanese and some of these folks, there was very much a pressure on them to be as Protestant as possible. A lot of this is around the 1840s. The Presbyterians are largely in power. And so they said, look, just adapt, okay? And that's when you start getting pews in churches and things like that. We don't have pews, for those that are watching and wondering why I reference that. And a lot of those practices started going in, like passing the plate and this and that. Now, even if we were to do something similar like that at St. Andrews, we serve the third poorest county in Texas. And we are the only Eastern Orthodox church for an hour in any direction. We've got people that drive up from Schulenburg, from Smithville, from Seguin, from New Braunfels, from San Antonio and Austin, in some cases, down from Georgetown, all over the place, really. But we serve this poor community, and I never wanted anybody to feel shamed if they couldn't put something in that plate, or the person looking next to them going, what did they put in that plate? But also it breaks up the Divine Liturgy. Yeah. And the Divine Liturgy shouldn't be on wrestling out our wallets or writing a check. It should be on the redemptive ministry of Christ. And so there's a little slot next to the candle box as you come into St. Andrews. And if you light a candle for an intention, or you send in a commemorative prosphora into the altar, you're welcome to place a donation in there if you can. But I always wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt of, if they're able to donate, they will. And if they can't, they won't be shamed for not being able to. And so at St. Andrews, we have a Tithely account that's posted on our website. People sometimes send in PayPal donations. Some people give cash, some write checks. But the Mother of God provides. Here we are 4 years later in this same location, and the bills are getting paid. The lights are staying on. We are approaching the point of looking for a second property to build a larger second temple. And we've actually got enough money in the bank that when we go to write checks for people to help them out in our community, or we're going and buying food and diapers or things to keep in our food pantry, we don't have to worry about them bouncing. And so that's really all that we've kind of looked at. Now, a difference in that is a lot of Orthodox priests are non-stipendiary. I don't take a stipend, so I don't get paid for my service to the parish. I work a couple of secular jobs, one in consulting and one as a college professor, and that pays me and supports me, and I don't need to take from the parish. And so anything that would come to me personally goes right back into the parish and into serving our community. And we're able to do that because it's kind of the expectation. In a lot of the mainline parishes, like I'm sure the mega church guys, they're going into it, and yeah, they may have a heart for ministry, but they also know they're going to make a pretty healthy income, because we go into this knowing that we're not going to make any money from it. A lot of that, it's a lot easier to say everything goes back into the parish, and we're buying wine, we're buying candles, we're buying olive oil for the lamps, whatever needs to be purchased. But first and foremost, we're there to serve the people, not to rake in cash.
Yes, well put. In closing, I would like to ask you for advice for myself or anyone listening that are curious about Orthodoxy or feel like they're conflicted in life right now, or they're kind of at a point where the last 2 years, let's say, have been insane and they're looking for answers. Can you speak to those people?
Well, the number one thing that I tend to say, and that is printed right on our sign, is come and see. And we have folks from all walks of life that enter Orthodox churches. We have millionaires, and we have paupers. We have folks that are living in mansions, folks that are living in their vans, and everything in between. And there are people that come to church dressed to the nines. There are people that come in jeans. All are truly welcome. I think a lot of the tendency within the past couple of years is because we haven't had that social engagement maybe as much, we've become more introspective as a people. And I think this is broadly true of most of us, is we start to really reflect on who am I, what are my values, what do I have? And we start looking around at our stuff. The Orthodox Church invites people to look less at that and more at the community, more at how do I form a personal relationship with God, and how are these people going to help me do it? Now, when you come into Orthodoxy, we don't say, hey, you need to quit hanging out with all of your non-Orthodox friends, but we do say you are going to find relationships and friendships here that are going to help you grow not only communally, but spiritually. And so I think a lot of people who through the last couple of years have maybe they felt alone, or maybe they felt like they didn't have any kind of solace or any kind of support, I would encourage them to find their nearest Orthodox church and go there and speak to the priest, but also just speak to the people in the pews. We've got a great community at St. Andrews, and one of the wonderful things is if I see someone new come through the door and I can't get out there right away, I know that someone else there at the parish is going to go and introduce themselves, make them feel welcome, and tell them that they are welcome to anything that they want. They should make themselves at home because they are home. We talk about coming home to Orthodoxy, and we really do mean that. Of this is kind of the end of your searches, and you don't have to look around at all of these various denominations and their different pulls and so on anymore. Is you're here, you made it. And so for those people that are maybe feeling the strain or the hurt of that the past couple of years, or don't know how to begin that relationship with God and with themselves and with their community, you don't have to have it all figured out when you walk through the door. We'll help you figure it out as you go along, and there's a lot of support and a lot of prayer and a lot of community there waiting.
Do you have any book recommendations?
Oh, goodness. There are so many books that are out there. The most popular one is probably The Orthodox Church by Metropolitan Callistos Ware. That's one that a lot of folks read. The book that really got me started thinking about it as I decided, okay, this is serious and we need to do this, is a book called Light from the Christian East. And I cannot remember the author. It's actually written from a Protestant perspective. And it's essentially this guy going into a study of Orthodoxy and saying, this is what and he intended to stay a Protestant. I don't know if he ultimately did or not, but this is what we as American Protestants could really stand to learn from Eastern Orthodox practice. So that one is outstanding, but there are so many books that are out there. Father Thomas Hopko has written a number of books and has podcasts as well. I'm coming kicking and screaming into the 11th century myself, so this is my first time on a podcast. But yes. I've been interviewed before, but never on a live podcast, so this new territory for me. But there are wonderful podcasts that are put out there. Father Josiah Trenum out in California has some wonderful materials. Our own area dean, Father John Whiteford, writes a regular blog and gives talks on a regular basis. Very informational. All right, and are you cool with giving out your website? Because there is that little thing. People can donate whatever they want, and I hope by all means, you just go down to donations on there, and you can give to us, and we're always very grateful. The website for the church is www.orthodoxlockhart.org. Awesome. I'm going to link to that, and you guys listening, that's not too hard of a thing to even remember, but I'll link to it in the show notes page for this episode. Father Ignatius, thank you so much. This has been excellent. Thank you, Buck. I had a lot of fun. Yes, sir. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that chat with Father Ignatius. Like he said, go to their website. If you'd like to give them any donations, they could always use that, of course. And if you're looking into Orthodox Christianity, like he gave you some book recommendations right there. The one that I was trying to remember that Vin Armani told me to read, the name of it is God's Revelation to the Human Heart by Father Seraphim Rose. Highly recommend that. Very small. It's like I said, it's almost a pamphlet, but it's on Amazon. You can find it. Small book. Very, very good. I highly also recommend the book Nihilism by Father Seraphim Rose. Really any book by Father Seraphim Rose. He has been a big help for educating me on a lot of this stuff. I've got several of his books, and I highly recommend all of them, truly. But Nihilism, really, really good. And what else? As for this show, you know where to find me, counterflowpodcast.com. Go to iTunes, leave a review, if you will, or a review and a rating for this show. It helps me with the algorithm. Go subscribe to the YouTube page. Hit that subscribe button. Just search Counterflow with Buck Johnson once you get to YouTube, and you will find us. You will find us. Spread the word. Tell your friends. And, oh, yeah, the Patreon site. If you are so inclined to donate to this show, you can start at just $1. That's all you got. And, I mean, you can end it. It's infinity, the amount you can give. You know, I don't discriminate. But that's at patreon.com/counterflow. And every
penny I get from that goes right back into this show. I promise you that. You've got my word on that. Thank you guys so much. I hope this episode hit home for you. I hope it left you with some curiosity about Orthodox Christianity. If you're already into it, I hope you enjoyed it and learned some more stuff than you've already known about it. And you guys have a Merry, Merry Christmas. See you soon.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast, a part of the Renegade Media Network.